Welcome to this week's episode of our podcast, Is Breakfast Included? This week on the show, I got a chance to sit down with my good friend, Mark Haney. Now, Mark is our video director out here on the road, and that's what he does. He's a video director. He's the guy that's controlling all the camera work that you see on the screens. He talks a little bit about how he got into that, but he really gets into where he came from, his upbringing, his relationship with his family, his brother, who kind of got him into this industry. That's a great story that he gets into, and some of the people that have influenced him throughout the way, and how he's had a chance to turn around and help those people or bring them onto his team. I had a lot of fun with Mark, and I hope you really enjoy his story. Let's check it out. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Right.
My name is Mark Haney. I'm originally from Knoxville, Tennessee. Grew up in a community called Fountain City. And I've been a person on the video side of the concert touring business for well over 30 years.
Yeah. What was it like growing up in Knoxville? Do you think you'd end up here?
No, never. In fact, it's funny. I went to college to avoid doing this for a living because I had an older brother who did something similar but different in this same field. He was, a monitor engineer, and for people who don't understand what that is, there's always two sound guys in the building. The person that mixes what the crowd hears in front of house, and then the person that's either stage right or stage left who's mixing what the band hear. And, I had watched him travel all over the world, all over the country, trying to make a living and raise a family. And it's never easy in this business doing that. And I had thought, I'm never going to do that. But of course, when I got out of college, I got sucked right into it.
Yeah. How much older was he than you?
14 years.
14 years.
14 years.
Yeah. A lot of people think that what we do is we're out here just, it's that old joke. Oh, you get to see so many places. We see the venue and the bus.
Yeah, that's about it.
Today we have we had a whole day off today, and it's been nice. But normally, that's what we do. And I got into this late. I got into this in my 30s. Why didn't you follow the monitor engineer route like your brother? Usually that's how it is. Like, somebody and you're like, hey, I'm going to do that. Like,
Well, my evolution, was interesting in that I kind of came at this business per chance, not just because of my brother, but when he gave me an opportunity through people he knew to make extra money. Mm-hmm. That's how the quote unquote apprenticeship sort of began for me. He had a good friend in our hometown of Knoxville that was a local promoter, a guy by the name of Steve Gudis, who has since passed, unfortunately. And Gudis was a really legendary kind of guy. And he had this very distinct East Tennessee accent. His, whereas our dad was a Southern Baptist minister, Steve's dad was a Jewish furniture store owner in Morristown, Tennessee.
Okay.
And he worked for Antam and G-Force. Those were two of his companies that he was involved in, promoting rock shows, in and around, that whole region of Appalachia from like Knoxville, Tennessee, all the way up to Charleston, West Virginia. And I worked for Steve just basically, as kind of one of his hit squad of guys that would go in, on any kind of show. It could be a show at the old Tommy Bartlett's Water Circus in Pigeon Forge, to putting up pipe and drape at the Gatlinburg Convention Center up in the Smokies next to the National Park, or doing shows at the Coliseum or at Thompson Bowling Arena, or even on a barge in the Tennessee River, and it was just me and another guy named Chip Day, whose older brother Randy Day had worked for the Marshall Tucker Band. And me and Chip would literally, I learned through him and my brother how to wire a stage, going to direct boxes and breaking out to go to the monitor console. So I had a sound background and learned basic signal flow that way. Mm-hmm. And then you just get kind of thrown into doing everything as a stagehand, working as, somebody who literally builds steel, or somebody who builds a wood and steel stage underneath, a top that you've already erected, The guys from Ben Jumper's company down in Chattanooga, Tennessee would come in with a roof that Steve had rented. We'd put a deck that him and Jumper owned underneath it. Then we would unload the lighting truck and fly that up in the air or put it on genie lifts, and then we would, do the sound. And so, I kind of got a great scope of all of it, and a work ethic to go along with it that I had gained from my dad and my brother. And that's how I sort of began to evolve. So I didn't start in video, but what's funny is that I just wanted to hang out with my brother because he was fun and, as good a friend as I had. And what kind of came out of that friendship and, and our brotherly relationship was, an education and a career that I didn't know I was going to have, even though I went to college, during that, the end part of that time. So I was a stagehand, I think, from like 15 to like 22.
What'd you go to college for?
I went to college for broadcast journalism. I wanted to either be a play-by-play guy on the radio for, a team of some kind. And I didn't even know what that was yet. I was still trying to define it. But when you get a broadcast journalism degree, you're learning how to read and produce news. And so that was something that I was doing at the same time I was doing all this stagehand work.
Right on, man. Right on. You were telling me a story the other day about your brother of who he ran monitors for.
Man. My brother's, more of a legend than I'll ever be. He basically, when we were growing up together, as I said, we grew up in a pretty normal family. My dad was a Navy veteran. He'd fought in the Pacific in World War II. My mother was a housewife. They met when he came back from the service in 1945 or 6. They were married by 47, had my sister in 49, my brother in 54, and me in 67. And I was kind of like, I was a little bit of a no, by the way, at the end of the line there. And I had a great family. I mean, people often envy us for what we do. And not only do they not kind of understand it sometimes and think it's very glamorous, but, so they'll say things like, oh man, you're so lucky you get to do that. And we are, and I am. But where I really won the lottery was my parents. I had an amazing mom, an amazing dad, and they were just really good, kind people. And from that, I kind of came into this crazy business with the tools that I had to deal with everything, that I didn't even know that I had. Kind of like this, by chance apprenticeship that I got by just working as a stagehand.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny you say that because when you came on board last summer, the one thing that everyone on this crew that had been here for a while was saying was like, man, that guy's just friendly. Like you give off this energy that's like very cool. Welcoming,
That's a nice thing to hear because all I've ever wanted in my life is for folks around me to feel comfortable. Not that they have to like me, but I just want them to be able to be themselves and be who they are around me. That's always been important to me.
Yeah, I don't think there's, like you said, what we do is we're very lucky to do it. I'm very lucky to do what I do for a living. I never take it for granted. I always think that some people would call it a blessing because I love what I do. There's so many people out there that hate what they do, but they do it day in, day out. And we get to do this, but there's no room in this industry to be jerks.
No. And you know what? What's interesting and kind of plays into the different layers of my own story is along about the time I was 12 or 13 and I started hanging out a lot more with my older brother who was, by then in his mid-late 20s. And he was in the early 70s, to back up a little bit, or early 70s, the late 70s, he started running sound for a guy named Sammy Hall, who was kind of a Elvis impersonator / rockabilly / Christian artist who worked mostly and made all his money mostly on these Amway meetings that he would do. Okay. And so somehow, because this guy was based in East Tennessee, my brother got hired to work for him. And my brother was a trained pianist and had a great ear and had played in many rock bands as a B3 player. And so all that experience kind of made up the soup that was him, and he ended up being a monitor guy because he understood how to mix for musicians.
Yeah.
Because of him being a player. And somehow that transitioned, and I think it was through a childhood relationship with this guy named Ray Ryder, who had been married to a cousin of mine and who my brother had grown up around, and who's a real character, Coco, as he's called. And he's something else. And by the time my brother was finishing Sammy Hall, Coco was working for Waylon Jennings. And he kind of brought my brother into that camp just as another guy was arriving there by the name of Randy Fletcher, who everybody in our industry knows as Baja. And so at 12 years old, when I would go over to hang out at my brother's house, which he was always so kind, he would say, "Hey, little brother, can I come pick you up? You want to come hang out?" And just to get me out of the house. Cause it was, my parents were very straight laced and very religious, but they were a lot older as well. And so he wanted to kind of get me out and just let me have fun.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that they were oppressive or anything. They just were very normal people who, from that generation, didn't do a lot,
Yeah.
My dad's one of those guys that wore a fedora like all those guys in the 40s did, right?
Yeah.
And
Tom Landry.
Yeah, Tom Landry. Yeah, in fact, all my buddies I played high school basketball with used to call my dad Tom Landry because he'd walk in the gym with that hat and a suit on. And but anyway, long story short, I'd go hang out at my brother's house, and back in those days, there were a lot of fly dates, for guys that were with a band, where they would just go in and do stuff, and you'd take the equipment that you had, at the venue and make it work for the show for your artist.
Yeah.
Maybe we still do that now, but
Yeah.
it's on a different kind of a plane, I guess is a good way to put it. And so I sat from like 12 to 16, 18, listening to my brother advance shows on the telephone. What kind of console do you have? Okay, how many inputs do you have? Okay, we need this many. Can you put a sidecar on it? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And through just osmosis, listening to that and hanging out at my brother's house. And then, and after you get off a call, we'd put on a record and hang out, because that was back when you sat and you listened to music.
Yeah.
And and then as I spoke about these people, about, Coco and about Baja, especially Baja was around a lot. He was my brother's best friend. Coco and my brother were really, really close friends and had been for years, but they would also get into a lot of trouble together. So they tried to keep them guys separate a little bit. They only let them room together for the first 6 months on Whaling because it was trouble. And, but anyway, lots of great stories came out of all of that too, that, I don't know are appropriate to share here, but man, what a
You can share anything here.
a fun, amazing time in the business. And, and it was also a time that was pretty wide open, I think, where it had to do with lifestyle, drug use, how people partied and, and just how they were.
Yeah.
My brother at that point was, till I was about 16, was a single guy, and, and they lived at a high rate of speed and had a large time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and they were all doing all these shows. Some of the first stadium dates, I'm pretty sure, in country music history, which was with Willie Nelson. So it was, Waylon and Willie. And then there was always a cast of characters that were opening up earlier who were musicians they all loved, like B.B. King or Albert King or Neil Young and Crazy Horse or Chris Christopherson or,
Billy Joe Shaver.
Billy Joe Shaver, Johnny Cash. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so that was it was into all of that I was dropped in my teenage years. Jerry Reed used to open a bunch of shows. You want to talk about mind-blowing as a teenager, seeing Jerry Reed play.
Oh, yeah.
That was just something. And I'll never forget, he played the old baseball stadium in Knoxville, Tennessee, and he was the opening act for Waylon. And that was a trip to go to a show at like 16 years old, I'm pretty sure I was, and see that guy open for Waylon, and and around all these guys that I'd been around that were my brother's buddies. And
yeah.
At a place that my dad had taken me to see baseball games when I was a kid growing up. So it was, so that was kind of how this all started for me. and really, you know, David and I were still just, David Haney and Mark Haney from Fountain City there in North Knoxville, but getting thrown into this world like we all get kind of tossed into it, and then you either sink or swim,
Yeah. So going back to your brother and your parents, like your dad was a Baptist preacher, you said.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that play out, with your brother being in the industry, kind of taking you under his wing with them? Were they worried about that?
Oh, heck yeah.
I grew up a Baptist. That's why.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, man. I mean, I got to think that they were, had they really known what was going on, they probably would have been scared to death. But, we had such a good upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, kind of that kindness factor and that just the our faith and all that kind of thing that entered into it. We were pretty safe and solid as humans.
Yeah.
But I mean, man, I'll never forget, I would think about it. I would think, man, gosh, how does my dad feel? But he was always proud because he understood the level at which we were doing it at. And I think he also saw that we were good people and that we treated others the way that he treated people. And so, and so I felt good about all that. And I always had really honest conversations with my dad about everything. I had him till I was 29. And so I was just starting to I had gotten my first job as a director when he passed. So I had kind of developed to the point that I needed to, I guess, as a person, and as a professional that I needed to, that, it wasn't such a bad thing that he left me a little bit early, but he,
how old were you?
I was 29 when Dad passed. And, it was right before I came here and met Robin Toy, of all things, who's on the video crew with me. It was literally 10 months before. And Robin's a gentleman I could talk about forever. We did all kinds of fun things together. But, I think mom was probably more worried about us because she was just a worrier.
Yeah.
And, but I'll tell you a great story, man. I had a friend I went to college with, and, he called up my house, and, it's when the phone was still on the wall. And my dad answers the phone, and he says, hello. And he goes, this guy's name's Chris Myers. In fact, he texted me the other day, and he said, hey, preacher, is Mark there? And he said, son, only the Lord knows where Mark is. And he says, I'll tell him you called. Click. What was funny about my dad was my dad never, even though he would talk your leg off in any other given situation, when he was on the phone, he was always really short and to the point. And the only thing I can put it down to was that, people had to pay for the phone back in the day by the minute or whatever, and they were really conscious, about getting the information and then hanging up.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, So I think they were okay with all of it. They came to a couple of concerts. The first things I did out of the barn in my career were country shows. Yeah. And so they were okay to go see that. Yeah. They could go see a hillbilly show, but they never came to anything after that because it was all rock and roll or pop.
Yeah. Well, those a lot of those venues you were saying, around in and around Knoxville. I started in country music. I'm Texas, and so a lot of those venues I'm familiar with. And you come to a rock gig or you come to other gigs I've done. You're never going to be at those venues. No. You're only going to do it with really artists from the South.
You're not going to do the TVA fair with Bon Jovi.
No.
Right.
No. Your faith, you seem to have a deep grip on your faith. Are you still?
Yeah.
Is that something your parents instilled in you that you carry? Or?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. It's funny because, the way I always look at faith is, it's a personal thing and a personal relationship that only you have or I have. And, but it's funny how it shines through in a given circumstance, depending upon how you were raised or how you treat people or, golden rule kind of stuff. I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. I'm probably firmer in my faith in my middle age than I was in my 20s and my 30s because I was, living a little bit more wide open.
Right on, man. Yeah.
Even though it wasn't as bad as my brother and those guys were in the 80s,
Yeah.
but, or anybody, I guess, for that matter, was in the 80s. We all had a lot of fun and did a lot of things we probably wouldn't be proud of right now. But, but yeah, it has been. My faith, I think, is what, was an anchor all the way through my journey.
Right on, man.
Yeah.
Right on. So you are a video director.
Yeah.
That's your title?
Yeah, that's
I
my
see
title.
you guys behind the stage and you're all so calm, but really, like, you guys got a pretty important gig there.
I always tell people I'm like a duck, You see me on the top of the water and I'm floating along, looking all calm and cool, but underneath the waters, man, I'm paddling like hell. Basically what it is that I do. And I came at it from very early in the video days. The first time I ever saw video at a show was in the late 80s. And I want to say it was probably Randy Travis in like maybe 1988, because Baja and another guy that my brother worked with very closely named Bob Butler, who's also since passed, he was a front of house engineer.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing Travis, and they were in town at Thompson Bowling Arena, and it was maybe only the first year Thompson Bowling was open. It was a brand new basketball arena, like 25,000 bench seats. Place was like a giant barn. I'll never forget, my dad walked in there one day and he looked around and goes, "Well, son, this place will hold a lot of hay." and so I went in, and they basically had a little 2-rack system, 3 cameras, and they put the show up on projectors on the side screens. The projectors were what, the business kind of started with when you were doing image magnification, as iMag is called, and they were GE Telarias. And it was a technology that was developed in the 40s or 50s to project an image on a screen in simulators for pilots.
Okay.
And for stuff like that. And so, and command and control rooms. Like you would see, where all the missile officers are down in a bunker in Cheyenne Mountain and they've got this big screen that shows the map of the world. Those were the things that projected that image onto that giant screen. And so, but we're taking those things out every day, putting them in a semi, ramming them down the road, taking them out, carrying them up into the seats, and those things weighed 250 pounds. So it'd take 4 stagehands, sometimes 5 or 6, to get it up into the seats on a billy goat platform, which is called a billy goat because the 2 back legs are staggered from the 2 front legs in height, to sit there level. And you could never tip it more than 15 or 20%, because if the oil got out, you were screwed. And so, and man, those things are probably not even a tenth as bright as what we have nowadays.
Wow.
So it's unbelievable from there to now how far projection technology has come.
Yeah.
The ability to push light and show an image and do it with more pixels,
Yeah. I think about when I started going to shows, I was about 16, 86, 85, 86.
Uh-huh.
And I think about it, like, there was no video screens in. I couldn't see the show.
No.
If I had cheap seats, they were truly cheap seats. Like, you just saw little figures moving on the stage. And it's so, like, common now that, you like everything, you fail to remember when it wasn't there. Like,
appeared, the only reason video's in the building now is because it increased the experience and the value of buying a ticket and going to a show.
Yeah.
Because then you felt like you were close up to those guys that looked an inch tall down in front of you, or girls. And I had the same experience. I went to a lot of my first shows at the old Civic Coliseum in Knoxville. And, I saw things like, I saw Rush, Moving Pictures. That was the first concert I ever saw. I saw Loverboy, and I think Saga opened for them. I remember that. And most of these shows, I'm a teenager and I'm going to see my favorite band and I'm stoned and it's all a wonderful experience and it's happy.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I was in college, when I went to that Travis show I was talking about, and basically, I saw that they had this little system and what they were doing with it. And because I was working in television production and broadcast journalism as a major, in communications, it was very interesting to me because all of a sudden I understood what was going on. I was just beginning to put together what video signal flow was compared to audio signal flow, that you work in every day
Yeah.
with your instruments and with your amplifiers
Mm-hmm.
and DIs and DAs and everything else. I applied that into that realm. And, I'll never forget sitting down in a professor of mine's office, and because I had this idea that we could broadcast ball games in college. And we had this little mini step van and had some equipment in it. And I said, if we put a time-based corrector in that minivan and we daisy chain to each camera Genlock, and I said, and we send separate video signal from each camera back, and we put it in that little switcher, and we Genlock it to the sync generator to the switcher as well, send it black.
Yeah.
I go, we could actually tape basketball games, couldn't we? Or football games or whatever. And he goes, yeah, you could. And I mean, that was like the light bulb moment for me when I went, okay, I know how to do this from an engineering perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I was always more of a creative at heart, and I think that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But you gotta mop the floors and get the coffee before you can be the guy or the girl in any given situation. And that was the truth for me. So I got out of school and I had 3 job offers that I interviewed for. That was for small market television stations around the Southeast. And basically you were going to make a pittance and barely be able to get by a living to go work these jobs. But it gave you the ability to start moving up the food chain and get to bigger markets to read news. And I thought somewhere along the line, maybe I'll get lucky and meet somebody at a school and they'll let me broadcast their baseball game or broadcast, something that's to do with sports, and I'll be able to maybe get in there and get that job that I wanted.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of brewing all this in my head, and my brother comes to me toward the end of my senior year, right before I'm about to graduate, and said, hey, they need a video guy on Randy Travis with Baja and them. He goes, would you be interested? And he goes, and I go, yeah, I think I would. And he goes, you should go out and do it, man. He goes, I'm going to see those guys this weekend. I'm going to talk to them. And he came back and told me, he says, yeah, they're willing to hire you. He says, call this guy, talk to this fella. And I go, well, I don't know, man. I go, I've worked 4 years in college to do this. And what I didn't say to him was, and I also went to college, so I didn't turn into doing what you do for a living. Because by that time I had realized, okay, I have all the tools to do this.
Yeah.
I know how to get along with people and in any given situation. And that's 80% of what touring is, as I think you're aware, Bernie. It's just getting along with folks.
Yeah.
And putting up sometimes with things you don't necessarily want to put up with, but you do. And the other bit of it is having the skill set to do it, but it's more important to just show up on time, be reliable, do your job, and it all kind of fits together. And
it's the gig, right?
It's the gig, right?
Yeah.
And I knew that I had that ability, but I thought, man, do I really want to? And he goes, hey, man, he goes, just go out and do it for a couple of years. He goes, and see the country. He says, if nothing else, it'll be fun. It's a nice transition out of college. And he was right. And I mean, and of course, you could say I screwed up. You could say I didn't screw up, but I got on the bus and, and I never looked back. I had one little hesitation at about, I don't know, right before my dad passed away at like 28, 29, that I thought, okay, I've joined the circus. I've been on a rolling dormitory instead of one that's stationary for the last, however many years of my life. I guess it was probably 8 years at 6, 7, 8 years at that point. And I thought maybe I really need to go get a graduate degree. And right before my dad passed, we had talked about that. And he goes, I don't know if you want to go into, $40,000 worth of debt, son, just to get another piece of paper when you ain't paid off the one you got. And that made sense, right? And yeah, exactly. And so, but anyway, when he passed, I had literally just gotten my first directing job on something, and that then, catapulted me into the next part of my career. But I got out of college. I did 2 years on Randy Travis, with Baja and those guys, which was wonderful because it was like all these people who were like extended family.
Yeah.
My brother's old friends. And so that was my first experience with it. And I ran front of house camera. By the second year, I was a crew chief, and we're just putting in projectors, these Teleria projectors, fast full screens, small camera package. There was JVC cameras. It was as basic as you get. Because it was country, and as we all know, 615 can be very cheap. And so they wanted to do it as cheap and cheerful as they could. And then from that relationship, we had an opening act the second year named Alan Jackson. And all of a sudden, Alan was blowing up. And I had somebody reach out to me that was looking for a camera guy, and I ended up doing the next 2 years working, in fact, to back up, I worked for this company out of Tucson, Arizona called IMAG, and a guy named Steve Daniels. Mm-hmm. And my first director was Dan Hansen. And Dan taught me a tremendous amount. And the engineer on that, who is ex kind of Air Force and Defense Department guy who was really smart, named Fred York. Those are two guys that were early influencers. Then I went to work for this company called Performance Video because the money was like nearly twice as good. And they were a rock and roll company who came down to do country and had gotten this Alan Jackson account. And I knew those guys from having toured with them as the opening act the year before. They were blowing up. And I mean, it was as hot as anything I've ever been on. Had this song called Way Down Yonder on the Chattahoochee. And it was just the biggest thing. And country music was really surging at that point.
Yeah, that whole 80s.
It was Garth, Billy Ray Cyrus, and Alan Jackson. Yeah, those Brooks three guys. Brooks and Dunn shortly thereafter. Yeah. Because that's who my brother went to work for after he left Wayland, went to work for Alabama for about 8 or 10 years, and then went straight into Brooks and Dunn. He had
he's got some stories about Alabama, huh?
Oh, man. Tons.
Even I have stories about
Alabama. Yeah. Oh, gosh, for 2 or 3 years in college, right after college would let out in the summer, I would go down with my brother and stack PA at June Jam.
Okay.
I could do a whole podcast on June Jam by itself. I'm sure my brother could, and half of it we would have to censor. And and the bottom line was I kind of started gaining this experience. And, I had gotten to the end of Alan, and I needed a change. I had broken up with a girlfriend. I had some bad habits at the end of Alan that I needed to address. Uh-huh. And I had gotten let go, evidently, because the production manager didn't like me. Although I didn't realize it at the time. I just didn't get asked back more than got fired. And I never knew that till I thought, it was this one dude that didn't like me that I was working for. And I ran into him a few years back, and we got to talking about it. And he says, I always loved working with you, Mark. And I said, well, then why did you fire me? And he goes, no, man. He goes, I didn't. He goes, that was this dude. And he goes, I don't know why he did, Mark. He goes, and he fought me over it. And I go, well, you know what? Some things work out and it's all good.
Yeah, they do.
Because you've not lived in this business till you've been let go or been fired. And so, so that happened, and again, I was in my own personal life, I needed a change. I was doing a lot of stuff I shouldn't have been doing, and on the chemical side, and it kind of woke me up, and I found myself at home, and a little heartbroken over this chick, and started going to the gym and hanging out with my brother, and he said, he goes, come down to Nashville and hang out with me. By this time he was doing Brooks and Dunn. He had moved to Nashville, built a house, moved his family down there, instead of doing the 3-hour commute to the bus call in Nashville and doing the weekend warrior thing. And then, it was long about this time that he was also working with a guy who got honored with a Lifetime Parnelli Award recently, named Marty Garcia. And Marty is basically the guy who started the first company and became, I think, the biggest company that did ear monitors. Called Future Sonics.
Okay.
And my brother was working with him in those early days, developing that and helping with that. My brother and another guy he knew in town who was one of these sort of mad genius guys who worked for a radio company in Knoxville and understood frequencies. Mm-hmm. They were starting to do it too. Marty met him. He said, hey, come work with me. They eventually split up because and my brother went to work for Marty because the other guy was nuts. And and kind of again a mad genius, and he had an office at Soundcheck in Nashville, which Bob Thompson, who was one of the original Eagles crew guys that worked for Glenn Fry, had opened this music business kind of facility, music business mecca there in Nashville. And my brother had an office in there, as I said, with Future Sonics. I was hanging out with him in the aftermath of, my own kind of little personal crash.
Yeah.
And trying to kind of find my feet again. And Bob kept coming in every day going, "You need to call Danny O'Brien. You need to call Danny O'Brien. You need to call Danny O'Brien," which was this guy he had done the Eagles with years ago. And Danny had left the Long Run tour. Maybe he did one or two other things after that, but he ended up being one of the promoter reps for Avalon in Los Angeles, which all the bands came through. So, all the tour managers, all the production managers, you come across everybody in LA in that position. And they had a need at some point to start doing IMAG. Danny found a guy to partner with that was a TV guy out of Orange County named Tom McCracken to help him provide the gear. Started learning about it and applying it to rock and roll, and they created a company called BCC Video, which Tom had originally started with that name to do stuff at the Olympics in Korea.
Yeah.
But then they spun it off into that. That was a ready-made name and a shingle, and they went ahead and they started that company. And that company eventually became what is now Screenworks. Okay, which is owned by NEP, which is one of the largest TV truck companies in the world. And Screenworks is one of the largest video vendors in the world. So I was like maybe the second group of guys that came through BCC in the old days. And, I finally broke down to what, Bob was saying and called, and his nickname was Norton. Everybody in our business, as you know, has a nickname. Like these other guys I was describing. And I think they called him Norton because Bob's dad was, if I'm not mistaken, was Art Carney, from the old TV show The Honeymooners.
Yeah.
And anyway, long story short, and sadly, Bob recently passed. He was a lovely man. And I called, dropped Bob's name, and where I was getting kind of send us a resume. As soon as I said Norton, he said, "Hang on a minute." And the next thing I know, the man himself, Danny O'Brien's on the phone going, Norton, Norton, and next thing I knew, I had a job. I had my choice. He goes, "Well, I got two things." He goes, "I need people, man." And he goes, "You're obviously qualified." He goes, I've got Van Halen going out like in the next couple of weeks, and of course I'm thinking, oh my God, one of my favorite bands from when I was a kid. This would be incredible. And by then it was Van Hagar.
Yeah.
and he goes, it's going to go out, and he goes, and then it's going to, go to Japan, and then it's going to, be off for a second, for like maybe 3 months, and then it's going to go for like a year. And I said, okay. And then he goes, and then I've got Bon Jovi. And so basically all Van Halen was like North America and one run in Japan. And they were going to go open for somebody else in Europe. And he said, and the other one I've got is Bon Jovi. He goes, they start in India, they go to Southeast Asia. He goes, they go to Japan. He goes, then they go to Europe for like 2 months, and it's all in stadiums. And at this point, I hadn't done anything at that level. I'd done big arena and sheds and stuff, but I hadn't done big stadium shows. And it was incredibly attractive, even though Van Halen was a big, marker in my own youth. The ability to go do, stuff all around the world in stadiums was, something I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I said, well, you know what? He goes, that don't go out for a month. He goes, honestly, I need somebody to kind of oversee this and get it out the door. He goes, you could come out and do that and then go do it in Europe. And so, or whatever, and so that was what I ended up doing. I put it together, put it in, I remember taking brand new Sony BVP-90 broadcast cameras out, which was the latest thing there was, out of the boxes, and putting them together in packages and in cases to go do this tour. It was a pretty mind-blowing thing for me to get to take that next step up the ladder, up the next rung. And so that's what happened there. I did that. We went and we did all those places in Southeast Asia, and Japan. Japan's the first place we went, I'm pretty sure. And, it was quite a moment. My dad, who had survived kamikaze planes at Okinawa, to put his son on the plane to go do rock shows in Japan. He was the irony of all of that was never lost on us. And Japan was amazing, man. The people are so kind and so wonderful, and what an amazing first experience to get on a plane and fly from. I mean, dude, I've been doing, other than arenas and sheds, I've been doing state fairs and doing country music shows, and all of a sudden I'm doing Bon Jovi in a stadium in Japan, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Sometimes sometimes in our business we stop. We're like, how did I get here? Right? I mean, you're like,
oh yeah, I don't, I look back on it, and I have been so fortunate and so lucky in so many instances, but mostly it's been just about the fact that if you have good relationships and you value and invest in those relationships, good things happen.
I believe that. I always say I'm not a great tech. I'm a good hang.
I would agree on my part too.
Anyone that knows me gets sick of me hearing that. They get sick of me saying that. I'm sorry.
But you know what? We probably, because of our backgrounds, we probably self-deprecate a little bit more than we probably should. I mean, you're probably like me, man. I'm so humbled and grateful to be here at where I'm at right now, and the fact that I got to this point. I mean, that's just kind of, me from growing up as a kid to being, in my mid-20s doing stadiums all over the world. And, the thing that I kind of grew up and found out about on that one was that I wanted more from myself creatively. I had already kind of peaked and gotten as good as I wanted to get running a camera. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I could, I always felt like I could grow into being a director, but by that point, I wanted to be a director.
Yeah.
The guys that I was working with on that show, particularly a guy who was another, he doesn't know this, but was a bit of an influence at that time in my career, was a guy that was, 4 or 5 years older than me, named Brian Lockwood. And Brian was the director on that first Bon Jovi tour that I did. He wasn't on the second. He had taken another job and moved on, but Brian was so talented and so driven, and a little bit of that rubbed off on me. And the best that I can remember, and it made me want to. He encouraged me to sit down and cut an opening act.
Yeah.
And do stuff like that. I think he saw potential in me. The guy that was the LD on that show was one of the biggest designers in the world at the time, and there's a guy named David Davidian. And David was another guy that was hugely influential, as much as Danny O'Brien and Brian Lockwood was at that point in my life, because David, I think, saw something in me, and he always encouraged me.
Yeah.
And he's been like a lifelong friend. And what's funny is he went on from designing shows to be a video director and was really good. And I mean, it's just a great human. He lives in the Woodlands in Houston. Yeah.
Isn't that great? Like the people we cross paths with, they don't know the effect or the influence they have on you. And in our life, like we don't tell them. Like early on, I crossed paths with a guy named Steve Castro. He was working for Sugarland at the time when we were on tour. And this was my first time. My first real big gig was Red Rocks, and he came up to me. I don't know if he sensed that I was just as green as possible. He just came up, he introduced himself, and he said, if you need anything, let me know. And then, called me over, showed me all these tools. And I said, how'd you know? He goes, oh, you look a little lost. And but no, I could call him at any time. And then as I moved on, and I've never once in mind have I thought I know everything. But it's crazy. Like you hear you tell your story. I'm not gonna say we're similar, but I do. I have so many people that I've crossed paths with that don't know, that the influence they've had on I don't know. There's a guy that everyone knows in this industry named Takumi. He's a guitar tech. He's the legend. And I met him the first time in Dallas when I was a stagehand, and never knowing I'd end up in this industry. And he's become one of my closest friends. He's my go-to call, and he treats me like an equal, but it's guys like that look at me as an equal, and I'm like, don't, and it's flattering, but at the same time, you want to tell them like, dude, you're you've been a huge influence in how I treat people and how I do my job. And,
You know, my dad told me something years ago that has really stuck with me among many things, and it was give people the roses while they're living.
Yeah.
You know, and that's something that I always try to take a step back and do it when I have an opportunity. And sometimes you have to wait for the right moment to do it because you don't want it to, I don't want to say fall on deaf ears, but you want it to be meaningful to that other person.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, I'm 55 years old, man, and I'm still learning.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and the soup that makes up all of us is bits and pieces, ingredients that we found along the way.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, again.
I like that term you keep using, the soup that makes us, you know?
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, it's the only thing that I have to, I'm a simple hillbilly, Bernie. I have to use layman's terms to get my mind in the right place. Like another favorite one of mine nowadays is that I had heard. I mean, I've stolen all these from somebody else, I'm sure, or at least pieces of it. But one of my favorites these days is be where your feet are. You know, be in the moment.
Yeah.
Be, you know, because it's so easy to worry about what happened before, or to relive something, or to think about what's in the future, what you got coming.
Exactly.
And you have to give mind time to all those things. But you also got to take a breath and look around and go, gee, you know, this is pretty cool. We're in Leeds today in Europe, you know, a couple of guys from the South, you know, doing a big rock fight.
Man,
you know?
I thought I was going to live and die in the same shit town I grew up in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I find myself in places where I look around and I go, you know, like I'm 52 and, you know, John's taken me around the world a few times.
And, you know, we had that thirst too. I mean, even though we thought we were probably going to be in that same shit town, you know, we had that thirst that when the opportunity did come, we took it and ran with it. You know, one of my favorite records, man, is Steve Earle, Guitar Town. Even though it was one of his more kind of pop records.
Yeah.
You know, what was that? Hey now, baby, don't you know it ain't my fault? Love to hear the steel wheels humming on the asphalt. Wake up in the middle of a night in a truck stop, stumble in a restaurant, wonder why I don't stop. And that's kind of like the road.
Exactly, man.
Another one that was like that was Alan Jackson. When I was working for him, he did this record called Who I Am. And it was the last record before I left and went and did Bon Jovi. And I think I'm even in the album jacket on that one. And he had a song about, you know, I can't remember what the name of the song was, but he said, I sleep 80 miles an hour to the hum of diesel rolling down the interstate, dreaming about my little girls, easy chair that sits beside the fireplace. Then we'll shut her down in another town and come here what we came to do, sing for the people, count the money, and the miles back home to you.
All right.
And even though I didn't have a family at that point, I knew one day I'd want to have one. And that was poignant. You know, it's funny how some of all of this, that's what's cool about what we do too, is you get to have these special moments about how cool it is, you know, from the perspective of when people say, oh, you're so lucky you get to work for a big rock band or an artist or whatever. Yeah. And you do get to revel in that a bit. You know, there is kind of a little bit of that magic still left there. And I enjoy that too.
Yeah.
You know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, man.
It's inspiring.
Yeah. I'll say this again, and people get tired of hearing me say this. I'm watching a show sometimes, and I look up and I go, "That's Duran Duran."
Yeah.
You know,
I don't think I've shared this with anybody, but I had a neighbor who our families were friends for 50 years, and she still lives in the house on that same street I grew up in that her grandparents owned. And her name is Melanie Ray. And Melanie had pictures of John Taylor all over her room. And it was just like the running jokes as well. Melanie's got the new edition of Tiger Beat. I wonder how long it's going to take her to carve that thing up, you know? And but those guys in the 80s when we were young guys, you know, when we were teenagers and going into college were huge.
Yeah.
And yeah, man. And then, you know, you sit and you listen. I mean, you know, I was sitting the other night in London and I was going, gosh, it's just hit after hit.
I know,
after
right?
Hit after hit. And you forget, you know. I mean, I've only been working for these guys a year and it never ceases to amaze me. That part of it does.
Yeah. We got a bunch of new people on this crew. We were in catering the other day and someone asked me like, you know, what do you do on the tour? Mm-hmm. And rather than say, I look after the bass player, I go, I look after 4-time world's sexiest man John Taylor.
Yeah.
I don't even say I look after the bass player anymore. I just say I look after the 4-time world's sexiest man.
I'm telling you, that's it, man. And
But I mean, it's a good gig. We've all done other gigs, but this is the one that I keep coming back to. I love it.
And this is the one that we're loving, the one we're with right now too.
I know,
man.
right?
I mean,
right?
I came out of, doing all those big stadium shows, got an opportunity to do this. I'll never forget the phone call from Danny O'Brien. He goes, I want you to go do this gig. He goes, this guy's like an Irish Baryshnikov. And I thought, an Irish Baryshnikov, what is that? And then when I saw it, I don't even know how I saw it the first time. I thought whether it was when I first got there and watched him dance, I don't think we had an internet to look it up on then, or at least I wasn't that into it at that point. I might have had a laptop for work purposes or whatever, but I mean, it was what we would call in the South clogging, Yeah. And I guess that's where clogging came from in a sense, was Irish dancing or Scottish dancing. And so I got offered the opportunity to go work on this and then take it over as director. And that's what I did. And I had literally taken over directing it the week before my dad passed, went home, buried my dad, came back. But it was great because I threw myself into my work, and it was just, from there, it just kind of took off. I finished out a year there. I did a little short tour at the end of the year in Australia and Tasmania. And then we finished that and came home. And then the next thing was the States. Was over. And they came to me and they said, hey, would you bring the gear and just yourself over and hire guys in the UK? And that was kind of a little bit of oh, wow, well, how do I do this? And so I just thought, well, again, people, who do you know? I had worked with a guy the year before on Bon Jovi named Ray White. I called up Ray. I go, hey, man, I got to come up with an engineer and 3 camera ops in the UK. Do you know anybody? Mm-hmm. I know you work for Creative Technologies or Screenco at the time, I think was what he was. He was an LED, or rather a Jumbotron tech, because we had Jumbotrons back then. And he gave me these 4 names, and I ended up hiring all of them. And one of them was a guy named Robin Toy, who we're on the road with right now.
Right on.
And we all hit it off famously. I met probably 6 or 8 people on that tour that weren't even on the video crew that ended up being dear friends of the last 30 years, 25, 30 years, and all people who went on to be very successful in their own right. Guys like Rob Sinclair, who's one of the biggest designers in the world, Graham Feast, who up until not long back was Coldplay's guy as the LD and is an amazing, talented designer himself. Bill Leabody, who was the production manager.
I know Bill.
Bill's done everything.
Yeah.
And very, very talented, very good guy, old and dear friend. Toby Plant, who's Depeche Mode's stage manager right now. So, again, all these relationships and friends. Chip Calder, who's with Arctic Monkeys.
Yeah.
Chip
did this gig for a minute.
He did?
Yeah. I met Chip on the Gorillaz,
awesome.
And then he came and did this gig for a minute back in 2012. I love Chip.
Love working with him. He's
such a kind soul.
Yeah, he is. He reminds me of Chopper Borges, who's also was another big mentor and dear friend in my career as production manager, who I did Luis Miguel with for like 15, 20 years off and on.
Yeah.
And he's retired now. But yeah, again, relationships. That's it. And I've been very, very fortunate. Guy came out from Screenworks, who's going to be our U.S. vendor for video on this. Again, Danny O'Brien's company.
Yeah.
And I get to work with him again for the first time in a decade and a half, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
And Danny's guy who came out to look after this is a guy I helped get in the business and helped along, named Brian Littleton. This was on the video side, whose father was or is Chris Littleton, who's Green Day's tour manager right now, and for years did, and all in their heyday, the Eagles, Toto, Doobie Brothers, guys, and I worked with him on, on Luis Miguel, and those were, I mean, you just can't put a price on it.
No, it's even though this industry is worldwide, it's worldwide. It's a small community.
Yeah. My brother said to me one time, he said, there are less people that do what we do for a living than play professional sports.
Yeah.
And that never occurred to me. And when he said it, I went, yeah, you're right. So it's pretty neat. So I had this great, unbelievable, fortunate arc of a career that went from, as then starting as a director from Lord of the Dance to George Strait's Country Music Festival and stadiums for 3 years with another true legend and dear friend, Steve Lawler.
Oh, I know Steve from Texas.
From Texas, and his best buddy, Kyle W. Jones, who ran a trucking company and now runs a bus company in Nashville. And, all those guys, we had a great time. And, I worked with some incredibly talented people over the years who are no longer with us, like the Pig and David Anderson and, people who were just characters, man.
Yeah.
Who made the gigs fun and, made them stressful too because of some of their bad, ways, but they were, they were themselves, and I always tried to, to provide that space where we could all come together and do great work together. But gosh, George Strait, I did this thing called Burn the Floor. That was a ballroom dancing show that was very short-lived. I did a couple of the big Britney Spears things early on. That was amazing. Got to work with this amazing guy named Steve Cohen on that, and relish and treasure that relationship. Got to work with Chopper, as I said, on Luis Miguel. I kind of fell into doing Kenny Chesney because he grew up the next community up from me and took him from arenas into stadiums. That was a neat thing. And then did 3 years of that and passed it along to a friend who's still in the chair there. And, it's just, it's neat seeing the people that helped you and then in your wake, the people that you get to help as you make this journey.
Yeah.
And I kind of look at it now a little bit, I don't know, just like, it's this fun little, family that we all get to take part in away from our real families sometimes, So, and then, and it's led to, gosh, I can't even remember all of them, but I mean, I was really lucky to get to do Eric Clapton for 12 years. That was an amazing experience. And I saw some of the best music you'll ever see in your life. And even better, toured with some of the best people you'll ever tour with in your life.
I know, man.
Did that, and Florence and the Machine, with some neat people, Narcy Martinez, Phil Donnellan, who we all call Big Daddy, another good nickname. And other relationships. I mean, gosh, Vampire Weekend. I got to do the David Byrne thing in 2018, which was a real gift. My friend Rob Sinclair is always, throwing me these amazing nuggets occasionally to get to creatively dive in and, and just really stretch yourself.
Was that the tour with all the wireless?
Yeah.
There was no cables.
The entire band was wireless.
Yeah.
My good friend who lives over here, John Chadwick, mixed that and dealt with all that wireless every day, which was an amazing feat in and of itself. A good friend of Takumi's, Pat Latchman, was the tech.
Yeah, I know Pat.
Yeah,
Pat sang for Damage Plan too.
Yeah, Pat's a great guy. He's my neighbor. He lives
just
up the road from me in the valley, and
right on.
We're old and dear friends from Luis Miguel. He did some of the end part of that when I was still there.
Okay, yeah.
And he's just awesome, and that's how I met Takumi.
Okay.
I want to say maybe I met him too through another friend of mine from back in Bon Jovi days who's Japanese, but I think Pat is who actually introduced me
Takumi also
to him.
did Richie Sambora for a while.
Yeah, which, I have the Bon Jovi connection there, obviously, from doing Richie. Ricky Britton did him back when I was there.
Okay.
And Fumi Okazaki was like a do-it-all audio guy that also worked for Dream Theater a bunch off and on that Fumi was in and out of a lot of these gigs that I did over the years, and he's a genius. That's another guy that's just like, I could still see him with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth and a freaking CM Lodestar motor opening it up and reversing phase so me and the Pig can hang this screen that was a that was just a nightmare on Luis Miguel in Barcelona one time. It's just all these things come running back to you, that you go, you remember that time we did this? Remember that time we did this? And I mean, heck, half of it I've forgotten, and somebody will come up and say, you remember that time, Mark, that this happened and we did this together? And I'll go, holy crap. And I drag it out of the gray matter and remember it again, right?
Yeah.
And, yeah, all these things that I've gotten to do. And I mean, and this is a blessing and a gift. Again, Anar was a good friend of mine named Howard Hopkins.
Yeah.
Famous production manager, do it all, everything for Genesis, worked for Pink Floyd years ago for Morris Lyda, who's another legend in the business, kind of helped invent the game, a Texan.
Yeah.
And Howard called me up one day. I was covering for a buddy on Sting, and he said, hey, will you talk to this buddy of mine, Anar Peterson? They're going to need a video guy, and I think you guys will get along real good. And that's how this happened for me.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had other offers, and some of them were even better, but something about this, and you're probably this way too, Bernie. It's more about the people that I work with now and the situation more than it is the artist or the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, it was cool to get to know, hey man, I can come do Duran Duran. I know this music from my youth. I remember it, but Anar just seemed like such a good cat. And he was a friend of a friend. So that's,
Anar was our stage manager. We did ACL. He was the local stage manager. And we came in there at the time. We were going through a transition. Our former tour director had passed away during the lockdown. And it was a really weird time for this crew. This crew has been together for a long time.
Yeah.
And so we came into ACL with a very fractured, pieced together crew.
Unsure. Yeah.
Like there was people coming in that and Anar almost sensed that for backline guys, because when you don't have direction or you don't have that person that's there that's supporting you. And Anar came in and he kind of pulled it together for us. Like I said, we were coming out of a weird time, out of lockdown, out of pandemic.
Yeah.
And, our quote unquote leader gone, our crew just being dismantled. So the back line has been together for years, but Anar came in. And so when I heard that we were going to do US, I put Anar, I said, man, you should look at this guy to be our stage manager or maybe production manager. And he ended up running the whole thing,
Yeah.
And I love it. I love it. Everybody here loved him.
In my eyes, I think he did a great job.
He had the attitude. He was very calm. He never yelled. But
he understood the industry too. He understood, I think, the camp, which sometimes is as important as being good at your job.
Yeah.
And I think he was the right fit.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
The people we have now are great too, but just in a different way.
Yeah.
But I tell you, I loved Anar.
He was a good dude, man.
Good cat.
He's a good dude. He
really,
still
really
is a
human.
good dude, but
yeah, still a good human. Maybe we'll get to work with Anar again on this.
I know we're going to see him in Austin.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's gonna be a fun reunion when we get to hang out with him that day.
Well, man, I appreciate you taking the time, telling your story. I love your stories, by the way.
Oh man, thank you.
I know I've been trying to get you in this seat since last summer, since we were touring.
Yeah, since we were touring. And you know what? I'm lucky to get to do this. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know that I ever explained it really quickly before we go here, but I sit down in front of a bank of monitors every night, and I have 4 to 5 camera operators, and I have sometimes 2 to 4, either movable or lock off cameras that I can manipulate to capture a show. So you're shooting it like basically a concert you'd see on television. And, it's what I do is very similar to sitting down in a TV truck and cutting a ball game, and so for some reason, God gave me this ability to do that pretty well. And I'm just so grateful that I get to do it. And I sat down the other night at the O2 when we did both those shows, and it was it was still as fun as it's ever been. And then to get to do it with really good camera operators like we have on this one.
Yeah.
And, you know, and again, you know, just the experience of everything that happens from the time you get up in the morning till you get in your bunk at night or go to a hotel. You know, you get to work with people like yourself, like Robin Toy, which, you know, Robin's as good as anybody in the world at what he does. And the fact that I get to have him on this, even just for 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and with a good group of people, it's nice.
Yeah.
That's how I always look at a gig when I crew it too. Or when I'm trying to help put something together with other people is what's the best fit, you know, of personalities. And
it can,
all of
like
that.
you said, 80, I was told 90-10. 90% is your attitude.
90%
Getting along
attitude.
with people, living in hotels, airports, and on buses. That 10% is the gig, and you learn that.
You learn that.
You know, you learn that if you do it every day. You know, but yeah, it's all about your
all about
personality.
people, and it's all about getting along with people. And the arc.
Some people can't do this, Mark. You know, some people, it takes a toll on your personal life. It takes a toll on every aspect of your life.
And I can tell you this, you know, and the arc of my career has been so varied. I mean, the big part that I left out was that I took time off the road and went to work for different vendors as a sales guy / project manager, you know, enabling vendors to send equipment and crews out on the road to do these things.
Yeah.
And then at some point, you know, coming out of COVID, I decided I didn't want to do that anymore. And nor was it good for me to do that anymore. And I came back, even though I still directed a little bit here and there, I came back in and started doing this again full time. And most of it has always kind of been based around my family. I met my wife when I was here on that same Lord of the Dance tour. Oh my gosh, in 1998, which would be 25 years ago. So within the first couple of months of that, I met my wife, Nadia, who's English, at an event that was after one of our shows. You know, without boring you with the romantic details of all of that, we ended up together and married 4 years later and have been together a little over 20 years.
I know.
And if it hadn't have been for her, I would have never been able to do or accomplish everything I did from 1998 forward, because I had somebody that not only was patient with what I did, but was independent enough and loved me enough that, you know, that everything was always going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I had a place to, you know, to come home to fall back to or whatever. And it can be tough on folks. I've watched marriages implode. I've watched people have, you know, addiction issues. I've had to put up with a lot of it too, or live with it, because you're living on a 40-foot metal tube with other boys and girls.
Yeah.
You know, especially in the last, you know, and that's the other thing we've seen change in our lifetimes too is, you know, the first 15, 20 years of touring, it was really rare that there was a girl on your bus, you know, and now there's lots of ladies in the industry.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, being a father of 2 daughters, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but anyway, it's, you know, all of this is amazing, and I just appreciate the opportunity to tell a little bit of my story. And, you know, keep in mind, it's only one of 100,000 probably of people who have done what we do for a living, you know.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, man. You know, I was excited when I saw your name on the list. You know, I get a little weary going out on tour, but as soon as I see someone like that I'm comfortable with, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be all right. With different departments, but I know Mark's got my back.
Man, I feel that same way too, because when I hear somebody that talks like I do, Bernie, instantly I'm okay. You know?
I think you're the only one I'm around, it comes out.
Well, same here. It comes out. It comes out more when I'm around, you know, my own people, and
a lot of people say, like, you don't sound like you're from Texas, and then I just go, well, I can turn it on at any minute.
Oh man, you sound like you're. What's funny is we have the same accent, because a lot of folks from Tennessee settled Texas and brought that accent with them, and so I've always had a kinship that way.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's nice too. But you know, you look at the other guys that are just like on your team, for instance, Phil and Kevin and Ozzy. And everybody, you guys always made me feel welcome. Yeah. So being a fella that, I mean, I'm not even a year into this, Bernie. Yeah. And I still feel like, I'm like, man, this is awesome that everybody, you know, on this crew is so kind and so welcoming. And that's what made me want to come back.
Yeah. I hate to say it, man, but if, you know, if the core crew doesn't like you, they like you'll know.
You'll know.
You'll know.
You know.
But
just if you know what, anything you do, if you walk into it humble.
That's any gig though. You walk into an already established crew, you don't have to fit a mold. You just kind of have to not be too eager.
You have to be humble and kind, and you have to kind of hold back for a little bit. I remember the first year I did Clapton, because that was all a bunch of guys that were all at least 15 years older than me, who had been there forever.
Yeah.
And I just hung back and smiled and showed up and didn't say a lot and did my job, and again was helpful, but not in the way.
Yeah.
And it paid off. Eventually after a year, a lot of those guys were like, we kind of gave you a hard time, and we were a little bit hard on you, and you're actually a nice fella. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude, when I went and did Aerosmith, that was like posters on the wall for me.
Oh, yeah.
And going into that, I turned it down once, and I was just nervous. And their crew, been with them at least 20 years, some of them. And they just took me in, and they're some of my best friends now.
Yeah.
Those guys, we're on a text thread daily. And to me, that's more important than being accepted by the band, is being accepted by the crew.
Accepted by the crew.
Yeah.
I'll leave you with one good one, man. I turned down Van Halen, I think, 5 times in my career. Once as a camera operator, I think I talked about earlier, and which was what was funny about that was they were the opening act on Bon Jovi in Europe in stadiums, so I got to shoot them anyway, but yet not be in the kind of the middle of all of it, and ended up doing Scotty Ross and Bob Dates a bunch of favors, and they were good to me, and that was a neat experience for me. And I stood in front of Eddie every night and shot him with a camera. That was amazing. And got offered the job as a director years later, over and over again, and turned it down for various reasons. But one of the really cool things that happened was because of that experience, standing in front of Eddie every night, I guess he recognized me. And this is a fun little rock and roll moment. I just left Kenny Chesney. We're doing a show at the Home Depot Center in Los Angeles with Chesney, and I'd gone down to quote unquote look in on it, as the English would say. Go shake babies and kiss hands and make sure everybody was okay with the equipment and everything. We were renting them for the company I was working for at the time, which was Screenworks. And I walk in and I'm standing around with the guys in Video World. Well, I guess the Van Halen brothers were coming down that night to play with them on stage for a couple of songs and to hang out with them. And, eventually I'm standing next to the racks, and around the corner here comes a couple of security guys and Edward Van Halen. And he gets around the corner, he looks up at me, and he smiles, and he extends his arms and walks over, takes a cigarette out of his mouth, walks over and gives me a hug and says, "How you doing, man? It's been a long time." Pats me on the chest, turns around and walks off. And all the guys in the video crew are sitting there looking at me. And I was like, "I don't know, man." I said, "I hadn't seen that guy in 15 or 20 years, man." I said, "I don't know how he remembered me."
That's great, man.
Funny little stories like that, and it's full of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on, man. Well, again, thank you.
You're welcome
for doing this, man. I got to ask you this last thing.
Sure.
The podcast is called "Is Breakfast Included?" And if it was included, what would we be having?
We'd be having English bacon, omelets, and sourdough bread. We'd go all in, man.
Right on. It's good talking to you, Mark.
Hey, good talking to you, Bernie. Thank you. You humbled me for having me. I appreciate it.
Mark Haney. See, I told you, I bet you could just tell by the way he talks, his laugh, his whole demeanor. Mark is a great guy. I love being on the road with him. We did a run back in August, September of last year, and it was a lot of fun. And I tried to nail him down then to do this. And this time we just found ourselves in the right place, right time to do it. I really appreciate you guys checking this out. Remember, this episode's brought to you by Old Bones Therapy. If you go to Old Bones Therapy, place an order, use the discount code BREAKFAST, you'll get 15% off. Also, visit our Big Cartel store, isbreakfast.bigcartel.com. We really appreciate every order that comes through there. All right, guys, I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.